Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to make this short and sweet, but please feel free to, as Daniel said, ask your questions in the questions box and we'll answer them right at the end. So a little bit about Bellarc real quickly. A bit over 1,700 customers worldwide, a lot of well-known names such as Autodesk that you probably know, and a lot in the federal and state and local governments. People like the Federal Aviation Administration, covered California as the health care entity in California, insurance entity, I should say. And then again, a lot of U.S. Department of Defense customers, such as the Pentagon Joint Chiefs of Staff in Bowling and Andrews. That's run by our U.S. Air Force customer. Many have been with us for a long time. We think it's two reasons. It's a good product, but also we put a very high emphasis on supporting our customers so that they are all successful with our products. And we actually have customers located in over 40 countries worldwide. We have a number of US and worldwide patents, and founded in '97. This product is actually out in 2000, so this will be our 20th anniversary of our product. So no need to tell everyone, but ransomware has impacted everyone, and it's unfortunately getting more so, and they're asking more and more money. I just read an article where the median or average, ransomware requests last year was running around $40,000, and now in the last couple of months it has been more than double that. So definitely not going in the right direction. So a lot of ransomware organizations that have been breached by ransomware, obviously U.S. state and local government, a number of healthcare providers, and actually surprisingly a lot of fairly large enterprises worldwide are also getting compromised. And one of the really sad things is even managed IT service providers are getting compromised, and they're not getting ransomware, but the attackers are then able to plant ransomware on their customer sites because they have remote access enabled for those customers. So there was a recently actually in December there was a service provider that was breached, and about 3,000, literally 3,000 of their customers were attacked with ransomware. So not a good sign. So just a little bit of statistics. This is for U.S. state and local governments. We actually did this at the middle of the year, and we're expecting only about 63 separate ransomware attacks on state and local governments. Successful breaches, so I should say not attacks, but breaches, so successful attacks, or unsuccessful from the local government point of view. We were estimating about 63 based on the first 4 months. I just looked at the numbers, and looks like it's come out to over 100. So this is just about doubled from 2018. A really unfortunate set of circumstances. So, and the attacks, as I said, have been quite expensive. The average cost demand for ransomware has been going up and more than doubled in the last few months of the year. These are some well-known ones. Atlanta, Georgia, you're probably aware of, got hit pretty badly, and they estimated it cost them $17 million in direct costs to mitigate those IT systems. Baltimore, Maryland was offline for many months, not quite sure how much it cost them. Rivera Beach, Florida was a smaller community, but they took a slightly different approach. They decided they have insurance, so they're going to pay, or have the insurance pay. But of course, that makes the insurance company just charge higher premiums for everyone in their group, which is all the Florida cities and towns. So definitely, as cities and towns go to more digital services, and corporations, enterprises go to more digital services, these are definitely more becoming more at risk for attack. Will it stop? Ransomware is not uh, about data migration, although that has been happening more recently. But it's really about money. So, as the famous bank robber is supposed to have said in response to Willie, why do you rob banks? He said, well, that's where the money is. And it's easy to implement these ransomware attacks, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Here's some interesting stats. This is from 2013 to 2017. A very conservative group in the EU estimated that in those years, ransomware attackers made at least 100 million. And they did that by tracking the Bitcoin wallets. So they were unique wallets used back then. Now, unfortunately, it's a little harder to track because the attackers are using unique Bitcoin wallets for each of the attacks. So it's become much harder to track the numbers, but many people say it's about 10 times that much in just the 2018-2019 period. So on the order of $1 billion, we should say, order of magnitude around $1 billion. But those are not just the only costs. The costs are obviously even larger in lost services to your customers, or if you're a city and town, the citizens, and the cost to recover those infected systems. So how do they happen? And the reason we look at the attack vectors is to determine what's the best way to stop them. So this is all going back to some of the NIST has a security set of attack vectors and analyzes the breaches. So these are the top ones. Top attack vectors are still remote desktop protocol and remote desktop services, sometimes abbreviated RDP and RDS. So these essentially target these services on internet-facing servers and workstations. Surprisingly, there's still tens of thousands of unpatched RDP internet-facing servers out there today. And these are still opportunities for successful ransomware attacks. And of course, it's not just servers, but also workstations that have these services included. Just a little historical event, everyone probably remembers WannaCry, and that was exactly how the WannaCry virus gained its initial entry into a network. And last year, Microsoft added yet a new security update for RDS. So definitely important to look at. The second, and remote desktop protocol and services attack vectors, that accounts for about 50% of the ransomware breaches so far. The remaining ones, email attachments, and these are basically targeting unpatched applications and operating systems, and Microsoft macros that are primarily, if they're still enabled in their Office products. Used to be by default, that's no longer the case, but that still was also a profitable common attack vector. That was about 20%, I believe. And then here are the interesting ones. The remaining ones are pretty much drive-by websites and malvertising, so they're similar. So what is a drive-by website? And these are either fake websites or they're compromised real websites, and they are hosting what's called exploit kits. So exploit kits are a group of basically code that targets unpatched web browsers, targets plugins, and these are things like Adobe Flash, Oracle Java, that exist on a lot of web browsers still today. Basically, if they're not patched, it doesn't take any action on the user's part. You just need to visit that exploited or that compromised website, and you will get successfully attacked. Your machine will be successfully attacked by those exploit kits. Malvertising is a slight change, or a slight it's similar to drive-by websites, but the exploit kits are actually delivered through advertising. So online ads from ad networks like the Google Ads network. The ad itself contains the malware. Naturally, Google and others do their very best, Facebook, to check this out in advance. But this still is a used method for the attackers. And these, of course, are on totally legitimate websites. So these ads come up, they happen to contain the exploit kits. If your browser has any vulnerable Flash or Java, for example, you will be compromised. And again, this is key. There's no user action required other than visiting that particular website. So how to stop it? So what we're suggesting is, if you look at the work that the Center for Internet Security has done, basically they're saying the most effective ways of stopping these attacks are to focus on the basics. And this is what they've outlined. By basics, they mean the Center for Internet Security controls. We particularly focus on the initial 5 controls that they call basic controls, and you can take a look at that in our white paper, and actually go to the CIS controls site too to get an idea. These attacks, as we pointed out before, are not based on unknown vulnerabilities. These are all known vulnerabilities that are being used in these ransomware attacks. So, there's really no need for the shiny, new objects that the security industry constantly waves in front of us. Things like, well, you've got to have machine learning and AI, et cetera, et cetera. This is really the basics, knowing what hardware you have, what systems you have, so you make sure you keep those patched, knowing what software you have to make sure you keep that patched. And we'll go over the other controls too. It's limiting user rights and a couple more. The other thing that we've really found is, and the CIS has really found important, is that you automate. If this process to manage the controls is manual, it tends to get out of date. It's very hard to repeat on a consistent basis, so you leave yourself vulnerable. And again, doesn't need to be complicated, and doesn't need to be expensive, just needs to be done. So let's go into a little bit more of the analysis here on how to stop these breaches. So we're basing all these recommendations, and this is also from the CIS. It's based on the attack vectors that we described previously. So these were known vulnerabilities, no zero-day exploits, and focused on keeping the operating systems, web browsers, and plugins patched. That's number one. The second is, obviously, we want to remove all end-of-life, EOLs, end-of-life software, because those are no longer supported with patches. A good example, well, there's always software, Adobe's had a lot of end-of-life in the last year. You should really uninstall that. Of course, even Windows 7 is going to become end-of-life fairly shortly. The third one is limit the use of admin privileges. So a lot of organizations give almost everyone admin rights, makes things easier as far as installing software, things like that. But it's at a great risk, because if any of those machines becomes compromised, then the attacker also has those admin privileges, and makes it a lot easier for them to gain escalation and privileges, and even domain privileges across your network. So definitely you want to, first of all, limit admin privileges. And that's true not just in Windows, but also other operating systems that you may have there. And the fourth one is implement the secure configurations. These are essentially configurations that came out of the National Security Agency a number of years ago. The NSA works for the U.S. Department of Defense. to try, and the group that helps defend, not attacks other people, but the good guys, that helps defend the Department of Defense, really came out with these initial 20 controls that the CIS now has. And one of those was a set of secure configurations. These are detailed configuration settings that you can see on the CIS. The CIS now manages that effort. So the CIS has certain benchmarks. The U.S. government has benchmarks. That's the U.S. GCB, stands for U.S. Government Configuration Benchmarks. And the major operating system vendors also have benchmarks that you can get from their sites. So Microsoft, of course, for Windows, and Red Hat for various Linux. Again, from the CIS, based on analysis, they found that the first 5 controls can reduce all breaches by 85%. These are not just ransomware breaches, these are actually all breaches. And all 20 controls by 94%. So pretty effective if you can do this on a regular, continual basis. And it should not be an expensive or time-consuming or manual process. A little review of what the CIS controls, first 5 in any case really are. We mentioned them before, but it's basically having good inventory and control of your hardware assets. So knowing which hardware assets you have and which ones you need to keep track of, knowing what software assets you have, continuously doing vulnerability management. So this is managing the known vulnerabilities on those boxes and keeping those patched properly. Controlled use of administrator privileges, we mentioned before. This is extremely important to prevent both initial attacks and to prevent easy escalation of privileges by the attacker on your network. And then the last one is the secure configurations that we mentioned previously. So that's really it. What Belarc can do to help you do this is basically Belarc supplies a single tool, creates a central repository of those controls, allows you to monitor those automatically, and does it on a continual basis. So tracks both all desktops, laptops, mobile servers, virtual machines, and the architecture works on remote systems. You may have many remote laptops or tablets, works on cloud systems. We've found it really interesting today that a lot of people are obviously moving their assets to AWS or Azure and others, and they're losing visibility up there, which is really sad because those can still be attacked, obviously have been attacked. You know, automation is really key to making sure that these controls are done. If it's a manual process, it's not going to happen on a regular basis, and it's really not repeatable. So we highly recommend automation. A little bit about the architecture. Belarc's server and database can be hosted on-prem, can be hosted on your cloud, or can be hosted on Belarc's cloud. There are 2 methods. There's an agent installed, or you can run the agentless. If you can install the agent, it's completely automated. The agent is essentially dormant, wakes up, the default is it wakes up at 4 a.m. local time, does a 10-15 second scan, and creates a tiny file, less than 50 kbytes, sends that file back to your Bell Managed web server, and creates the web server creates entries in the backend database, and then creates web-based reports that we'll take a look at shortly. So completely automated. Once the agent is installed, a completely automated system. We've had even large customers like the FAA with 60,000 assets around the country roll this out in a matter of weeks, a couple of weeks, in fact. Covered all of their desktops, laptops, servers, virtual machines. So can be very fast. Did not require any additional manpower. So these sorts of approaches can be very effective, both in terms of low initial cost and low cost for maintenance, low cost for manpower, but very, very effective. So let's just show you a couple of reports. Show you I'm not making this stuff up. So we'll take a look at just a, this is in the guts of the system. We'll just take a look at a desktop here just to show you briefly what kind of information. Maybe I should bump that up a little bit. So you can see that this information was updated this morning at 4:40 local time, Eastern Standard Time. Basic operating system model, but let's go to the controls that we're talking about. So here's the user information. So you can see here, if I click here on details, it shows me both local account users and domain account users. So it's very important to also pick up your local accounts. That's not typically available, easily available, but Belarc does pick that up. Obviously gives you the rights. A's are admins. P is, this red P means the password is more than 90 days old, excuse me, and gives you the last login dates, so you can track these things. What else did we talk about? Yeah, the group policies. This is obviously important to track what the order of preference is, priority is rather, and how they're applied to the machine. Comms information. USB storage device. This is not one of the CIS top 5 controls, but it is later, and it's used particularly for our U.S. Department of Defense customers that have approved USB devices only allowed, and that can be done by tracking this particular serial number that you can see here. So we track these by serial number. Again, this is the lowest level report. We'll look at some higher level reports later, and then showing what software is installed. So here even Bellarc picks up for some of the major software. We pick up the license keys and IDs also. So this is the software and the versions. You can see here, this is a little unique here, that we automatically pick up the last use date of all the applications. We've had customers that have used us because they're migrating. They want to make sure that they're only supporting products that are actually used. So if the products are not used when they're migrating these machines, they actually remove those programs. Makes life a lot easier. And let me show you the same thing for one of our hosted servers. So you can see here again, this was updated this morning also. UTC -8 I think is probably Pacific Standard Time. Same kind of operating system. We can see here that this is a Windows Server 2019 data center running on an Amazon EC2 T3 instance. Same kind of idea about the user data, whether virus protection, scan engine, real virus definition date. I forgot to mention that on the desktop. Software product IDs, installed software. Oh yeah, and I never got down to the hotfixes. So hotfixes installed, unfortunately there are none needed here. But let me just roll down to the vulnerabilities report. So now we're looking at the roll-up reports, and you can see here that these are the security hotfixes needed for this group within the Acme company. And you can see here the hotfix queue numbers, a brief description of the hotfix, and the severity. The severity is similar to the NIST CVSS score, but is actually applied by the vendor itself. So they're grouped into critical, moderate, I believe, and important, and end of life. There's also end of life ones here. So we can take a look here. If we click here, this is January 14th. So this is on a Windows 7 box, so obviously needs to be updated. Upgrade now, yeah, exactly. But you see here the message from Microsoft as to, you know, what this security update is all about, and we can click here on the actual number and get the list of the machines that need that particular update. Okay. Software compliance is a way to track what software is installed and how it compares to either images or approved software and versions. So you can put in here an approved range. So we've done this just an example for Acrobat. This is the approved range of software, and you can see, click here and you can see machines that are outside of that approved range very, very quickly and remediate those. USB storage device usage, we mentioned. This is more for our Department of Defense customers. They track USBs by, help them track USBs by serial number, and that then allows them to see which approved, make sure that approved devices only are used. We got a call a year ago or so or more from a U.S. Department of Defense customer saying, "Oh, this can't be right." And what they were wondering about, they saw that overnight in the server room, someone had plugged in a cell phone or a tablet, forget what it was. But what had happened was that, and the tech that plugged it in was just trying to power it up. But of course, the system mounted the drive, and we showed, this was a USB storage device, even though it was a phone or a tablet. But obviously, that was a big no-no. So we helped them, because that system was being instrumented. We could immediately see, who would plug that in, and what the serial number was. OS Update Agent basically shows you how they're being updated. So these are Microsoft update. This is actually no update, so that's not good. And then you can see here whether it's a particular WSUS server or SCCM server, etc. Encryption. So we track encryption on all drives. Show this report is showing only laptops, and this is actually showing drives that have suspended encryption. These are not encrypted, and down here below, fully encrypted. And we're also picking up the BitLocker and solid state drive encryption in hardware, basically. Virus protection, obviously, you probably don't want to be running Avast anymore, but this gives you the virus definition date, whether real-time file scanning is turned on. And then going back to the user accounts that we mentioned before, it's important to track these both local user accounts and domain accounts. So here we can see this particular administrator is logged into 15 devices, and we can see actually where those are. So we can see here, and this is a while back that they've done. Okay, and we do the same thing for domain accounts. So basically, check out the domain accounts, what privileges they have, and the various password ages. So in summary, there looks like ransomware is going to continue to strike, and in fact, it's increasing its attack, and unfortunately, also the successful attacks or breaches. So we've got to essentially make this more difficult and more expensive for the attackers. Right now they can go to one of these rent a vulnerability site and share the proceeds with the site owners. So they actually are just borrowing these attack vectors and doing attacks and then sharing the proceeds with the site. So it makes it extremely easy for anyone to do. You don't need a lot of technical experience, and that's because of the controls that we talked about are not being implemented by many people. So again, the solution that we suggest is implement the basic controls, the first 5 controls, monitor them on a continual basis, and automate that process. Does not need to be expensive, does not need to be complex. There's really lots of systems that are out there that can do this on an automated basis and doesn't take a lot of manpower. We do have a white paper that goes into a lot more detail on this topic, so please feel free to send us an email to info@bellarc.com, and we'll be happy to send you that along with a copy of the presentation. So do we have any questions? Also, please feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can ask the question directly. So I do see here a question. How can you limit admin privileges and still allow the user to perform Windows and other types of updates? Yeah, they need admin privileges if the user is going to perform the update, but obviously the user may not be the actual person that needs to do that. So that could be an admin that has admin privileges, not the general user. You know, even on my home machines, I've got two sets of users, right? I've got an admin, so that, you know, if I obviously I've got to have admin rights, but I don't use that account. I use just a regular account for day-to-day browsing. So you could even do that if it's you know, if you don't have an admin, if you want to give the user two accounts, just make sure they use their normal user account rather than the admin account. That's extremely important, not to give admin privileges unless someone actually absolutely needs that for IT operations needs. So typically that should be controlled by just your operations guys. Any other questions? So want to thank everyone. Oops, we've got